This training is called How to Guarantee Your Training Will Generate You Your Most Desirable Result and Beyond. Now, as swimmers, the problem that we always have is we're always fixated on the clock, or we're always fixated on the time, or how do I get faster, or how do I drop time, or how do I PB? But often what we forget is there's a whole nother world of training parameters or things to focus on when we're in training that can actually set us up. And I know recently we had Chelsea Hodges come in and she literally said time is the last thing that her and her coach focus on in training. I'll say that again. Time is the last thing that her and her coach focus on in training. So if we're a swimmer out there and we want to drop time, or we want to make our triathlon leg feel easier, or we just want to make swimming feel easier than what it ever has, we have to not be driven by the clock. We have to be driven by more parameters that actually set our swimming up for success. That's the goal of swimming, right? And I wasted so many years of my swimming life focusing on time. My coach would always put the time on the board and say, you need to hit this time, or hit this time, or hit this interval time. And this means you're fitter if you can hit this time. And you grow up only ever thinking about the time. And what that means is, and this was a really big understanding for me because I missed the Australian swim team 3 years in a row and I was holding amazing training times. I've trained with Michael Phelps, I've trained with Grant Hackett, I've trained with Michael Clem, I've trained with Cam McAvoy. Like I've trained with really, really great athletes and I know what good training times are. And believe me, for those 3 years, I was holding really, really good training times, but I still missed the Australian team.
Mm.
I still missed out on my goals. I still missed out on the desired result. And that's because a lot of swimmers, and that's why we're so big on this training, a lot of swimmers, all they do is just focus on the clock and forget that there's other training parameters that come into place. Kat, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, a lot of the time it's how we get the time, not just what the time is. So remember in our call with Chelsea, and I'd encourage you guys to have a look at it again. If we're increasing our stroke rate or we're increasing our stroke count or we're, overusing our legs or, if we're just trying to make the time, but not really considering how we can keep our good technique, our good efficiency, that's when we're teaching ourselves to break down. That's why you won't see a correlation between training and race day. That's why you're like, wow, I can do it in training. I made the time. Yes. But then when we have to do it for a longer stint and when we have to actually apply ourselves in the race, we're like, oh gosh, what happened? And that's what Dan was experiencing by missing the Australian team. I can do it in training, but why isn't it working at competition? And it's how we get the time that matters. And we're going to be teaching you about the inputs as to how we can actually measure and proactively see what's going on. We need visibility into swimming, and time is a single factor that doesn't give us the whole story, the whole picture.
And that is 100% true. And I think what we're going to do is I'm going to put them into a list of the things that we need to start caring about in training. Now, there's kind of different levels, whether you're more of a beginner, a junior athlete, and a senior athlete. But I'm going to give you like probably my one or two key ones that you can walk away and focus on today. But as you start to get better at swimming, as you start to be able to get your brain starts developing and you can focus on more things, then you want to add in these four key training parameters. So number one, we have stroke count. Number two, we have stroke rate. Number three, we have heart rate. And number four, we have time. Okay, so these are the four training parameters that really matter. So let's talk about stroke count. Stroke count is how many strokes that you do per lap. Now, what I like thinking about is as a swimmer, if we go into our warm up tomorrow and say we have a 200 or 300 meters easy, we jump in, we're, not really in the zone. And let's just say, for an example, I'm going to throw some numbers out. Let's just say on the first lap, we go 28 strokes because we had a dive. On the next lap, we go 32 because we didn't have the dive. On the next lap, we go 34. On the next lap, we go 35. We're only up to the 200 meter mark. On the next lap, we go 36. On the last lap, we go 37. What do you feel like we are training ourselves to do from the moment we get in? Okay. Now, you might finish the end of that lap and your coach goes, wow, you were quite fast in the warm-up today, or you were the one sprinting the warm-up trying to keep in front of everyone. But just have a think about for a moment what you've actually trained yourself to do. Okay. So stroke count is the parameter or the metric, we can say metric, that helps us know if we are breaking down or not. It's that simple. Stroke count is the metric or the parameter, however you want to look at it, that helps you know if you are training yourself to break down or not. Okay, so just by adding in a simple stroke count as a bit of homework out there right now. Just whenever you're doing your slow swimming, whenever you're doing a warm-up, start counting your strokes and see how inconsistent they are. So you want to check how inconsistent they are. If they're consistent, you're training good strokes. You want to see if you can get improvement and start lowering your strokes, which means you're getting stronger, where you mean your strokes getting more efficient. So stroke count, you can start to see here that it's telling quite a strong story on how good your swimming is going.
Absolutely. So when you're fatiguing, that's when typically we'll lose the stroke count. So by actually keeping count, you get to benchmark, all right, I was feeling really fresh here. I've done a stroke count of however many. All right, now that I've reached the end of the warm-up or the end of the session or the end of the main set, whatever it may be, it's a check-in with yourself. It's a check-in. Am I teaching myself to break down here? I'm not holding the same amount of water as I actually can at my best. So let's do a bit of a check-in and let's put some steps in place to make sure that firstly, we've got the awareness, you're tracking this so you can change things, you can keep yourself accountable, and then we can actually build on the strength element, we can build on our efficiency, we can do some work to make sure that we're keeping that consistency and we're not teaching ourselves to break down, because when we do that, what we do in training is what we do on race day. So you're going to break down in your races, you're not going to be able to hold that nice distance per stroke, and then you're not going to get the result that you're after.
Alrighty, so that's like the simplified version of stroke count. As we can see, it's a very, very important part. Okay, so now the next thing is stroke rate. Now, this is quite hard to get because you actually need your coach to get it on their stopwatch. Okay, so stroke rate is how fast your arms go. Okay, so this is a very, very hard training parameter to track because you need to be on your coach's case all the time saying, can you give me a stroke rate? Okay, so stroke rate is how fast your arms are going. And it's also really only beneficial. It's really only beneficial when working at race pace. Okay. So it's not that important, but it is still a very, very strong picture. And this can tell us so many different stories. It can tell us if our strokes come more efficient. It can tell us if we're dropping off in our races. It can tell us if we've gone out too hard and we didn't stick to our race plan and we've let our arms go too fast on what they need to, or if we didn't achieve the time in our race and our stroke rates were down, we mightn't have trained well enough. Like, you can start to see that stroke rate has such a strong story to it. It's just a little bit harder to get because we need to be on our coach's case and we have to cut our coaches some slack because they can have up to, 20, 30 swimmers in a lane. So again, stroke rate is important. It's not a key driver, but it is a very, very important part of the picture. And then the next one.
Just going to touch on that. So having open dialogue with your coach is something we always recommend. So if you are doing race pace work, which isn't all the time necessarily,